How many of you know a black man who has expressed to you that they're committed to voting for Donald Trump?
Does Kamala Harris getting in the race change the equation at all for either of you?
Change it, it ruins it. If she gets in, we're done. So
Done with what?
America's done for.
I don't know if you saw the news, but Joe Biden is no longer the nominee for president. By the way, isn't it weird? It's like been a week since he put in that letter, and he's had one appearance on video. Oh, I guess we saw him walking, meandering toward his helicopter with the USA jacket on Friday to go to Camp David or Rehoboth or wherever the hell he goes to watch the Olympics. Have you noticed that in the last 8 days, do we have a president? Have you seen him? Have you heard him other than that pre-recorded bizarre video that he put out? It's just weird that it's like, oh, it's all about Kamala Harris now. What exactly is Kamala Harris's job right now? Her job is to wait for Joe Biden to die. Okay. Well, I do want to point out how bad things are looking right now for Kamala Harris as she's trying to solidify this nomination process. Did you see that she signed the official paperwork making her a candidate for president, which, I saw that. I'm like, aren't there deadlines here? Aren't we well past the time she should have been signing this? Are there any rules or laws? Don't worry about it. And don't worry about those hundreds of thousands of dollars that'll just be transferred over to her name. It's fine. Even if it is illegal, we won't know about it until after the election. And the FEC is just going to come over and and then it's fine. It's all over. But if you're Kamala Harris, there's a couple of data points going on right now in the electorate that you are very, very concerned about. Take a look at this.
How many of you know a black man who has expressed to you that they're committed to voting for Donald Trump? Okay. For the brothers who have told you that or said that to you, has the emergence of Kamala Harris changed that for those brothers? No. How many?
Nope. In fact, I would argue that the emergence of Kamala Harris has probably solidified this sentiment. Oh, geez, black men are voting for Donald Trump. They don't like Joe Biden. So let's give them Kamala Harris as an option. One of the least likable politicians on the planet. And I don't know, something about her, I think, is probably repellent to your typical black voter who has already decided to go with Donald Trump. But the news gets even worse, actually. Look.
We did run into plenty of fervent Trump supporters who say the new challenger has only made them more enthused about the former president. Does Kamala Harris getting in the race change the equation at all for either of you?
Change it, it ruins it. If she gets in, we're done. So
Done with what?
America's done for.
Yeah. Now, of course, those aren't black men, but Kamala Harris has definitely got a male voter problem, which is really interesting because you'll hear all the time in the media and from Democrat strategists, you'll hear that Republicans have a real problem with the gender gap. You hear this term. Have you ever heard this term? The gender gap. They throw it around all the time. And the gender gap is defined as women, mostly single women, who consistently vote Democrat. This is usually written off for the position of abortion, that apparently if you're a single woman, you want to be able to behave as irresponsibly as possible and then kill the results of that irresponsible behavior before she has the benefit of being born. So because of that, you vote for women, or excuse me, you vote for Democrats. And that's called the gender gap. But what's interesting is that for Democrats, they have just as big a problem, if not even a bigger problem, with male voters. Men do not vote Democrat. It's been a trend going on for, well, a couple decades now, and it's never been more pronounced than it is right now. In fact, the strength of black male voters and Hispanic male voters for the Democrat Party has sort of mitigated the gender gap. It's basically been written off as, oh, that's just the angry white man, the angry white man. Well, they can't say that anymore, not with the numbers that we're seeing, because black and Hispanic men are also moving over to the Republican column. Black men by anywhere between 25 and 30%, if not more. And Hispanic men, it's almost 50-50 right now, voting Republican and Democrat. But you never hear gender gap being used for Democrats having a problem attracting male voters. And I assure you, with Kamala Harris on the ticket, it's going to get a lot worse. Don't believe me? Well, take a look at some of the numbers that are already in on this.
Says poll, with less than half of voters approving of her, but that is up from last Sunday when 35% of voters viewed her favorably. Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump's favorability has dipped, with 36% of voters now viewing him as favorable. A new Fox News poll of voters in 4 battleground states also shows a close race between Harris and Trump. They are tied in Michigan and Pennsylvania, while Trump leads by 1 point in Wisconsin and Harris is up by 6 points in Minnesota.
All right, let me just jump in here before any of my Republican friends panic at all. The Minnesota number, I don't know why suddenly Minnesota has become a battleground state that we're throwing on there. It was until very late that Minnesota and Virginia looked like they were tied. But to throw that up there as if it's as relevant, Republicans have not won Minnesota since Richard Nixon in 1972. Even Ronald Reagan's landslide, where he won 49 out of 50 states, what was the one state he didn't win? You guessed it, Minnesota. So set that aside for a minute. But before you panic about Michigan being tied, Pennsylvania being tied, Wisconsin, Trump being up by 1, let me just tell you 2 key factors here that you need to know. Number 1, all Donald Trump has to do is win one of those states. If everything else, the way it's trending, locks in, which is Georgia, North Carolina, Nevada, Arizona, all Donald Trump has to win then is one of those 3 states, okay? That's number 1. But number 2, it's never getting any better than this for Kamala Harris. This is her honeymoon. She's the new kid on the block. She's like, oh, look, there's a new toy to play with. Let's see. Oh, yeah, because there's so many voters, who are like, I don't like either of our choices. I hate both of them. Oh, finally, we get another choice. Okay, yeah, it's true. Kamala Harris is a new choice. But what an awful choice she is. And finally, the benefit of being a vice president is you don't actually do anything or stand for anything. Now you're learning who she is, what she's done, and what she stands for. And trust me, these numbers are going to change. That said, let's continue looking at how these numbers shake down because it doesn't get any better for Kamala.
Joining me now, Democratic consultant and former House Judiciary Committee Chief Counsel Julian Epstein, and Republican strategist and Madison firm lead attorney Jonathan Madison. So, Julian, I'm going to start with you here. What is your reaction to these brand new polls? It has only been 1 week and 1 day since Joe Biden dropped out of the race.
Well, Fox News does an excellent poll, but you really have to do an average of the polls. If you do an average of the polls, Donald Trump is still ahead by about 1 to 2 points in the national election, and he's still ahead in most battleground states. That's according to about 5 of the 7 most recent polls. So what we've seen is that the race has returned to the pre-debate norm where it has been stuck all year. The one change that you are seeing, you have to really look at the crosstabs in the polls as well. And crosstabs is a fancy way for your viewers of saying you look at the demographic breakdown of what's in the polls. The significant change that we're seeing is that Kamala Harris seems to be attracting more young voters that were leaving the Democratic Party and more black voters that were also leaving the Democratic Party under Biden. That's good for her. On the other hand, older voters and working class voters seem to be moving towards Trump. That's bad news for her. The reason that's bad news for her is because most voters in the Midwest states, the Rust Belt swings, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, are older and working class. So essentially what's happened, I think, is you return to the pre-debate norm, but you've traded a California voter for a Pennsylvania voter, which is not so good for Harris.
Right. And certainly, Jonathan, weigh into this because at the end of the day, and this is why there's so much attention being placed on Harris's VP pick, is because, she needs either Pennsylvania or Michigan or Wisconsin. It's about those swing state voters. Jonathan, what do you make of these new numbers?
Yeah, I think whether or not you average them or take them at face value, I'm not surprised. I mean, the Democrats are running from a sugar high at this point. But you got to remember, Kamala Harris's biggest problem is that there's still 99 days left in the election. I think that she's been successfully attempting to dupe the American people over the last maybe week and a half into believing she's done something meaningful as a vice president in the White House. And I think soon enough, probably following Labor Day after the DNC convention and whatnot. And by the way, if you're a Democrat, you should be happy because now you have a candidate who's competent enough to know the difference between beating Medicare and helping it. But, I think after Labor Day, you're going to see the issues drive this election, Cheryl.
Yeah,
and you're going to see the number one issue come out on display, which is immigration reform.
That's right. Ultimately, this is going to come down to the issues. Most Trump voters are voting for the issues, and the number one issue is immigration and border, and she owns it. That's why they're trying desperately to keep her from owning it. But you just heard from the Democrat consultant saying not so good for Kamala Harris. There's nowhere to go but down. This is the peak. This is the pinnacle. This is the best it's going to get. They might get a convention bounce, but I doubt it, because here's the thing about Kamala Harris, very similar to Hillary Clinton. The more you see her, the less you like her. Over on CNN, no friend to Trump or the Republicans. They've got even worse news for Kamala.
Thing to keep in mind, I think there's all this talk of all this Harris momentum. Maybe there's a slight bit of momentum, but I would argue it's actually a little bit smaller than folks think. So pre-Biden dropping out, look, Trump was up by 2 over Harris. We look at the polls now this week. What do we see? We see Trump is up by 1 over Harris.
And I want it. We'll finish this, but I want to remind you, this is not even how we elect presidents. We elect presidents state by state. So the national popularity vote or the national poll, it doesn't matter. You can lose the national election and still win state by state by state. But even then, Donald Trump is up, even after all the Kamala Harris hoopla. And Republicans never lead in the national polling. They're always behind in the national polling. The last time a Republican president won the White House and won the national popular vote was in 2004. All right. That's just not something that matters, except that if Democrats are behind, it matters big time to them.
The massive change is actually the change of candidates, because prior to Biden dropping out, he trailed by 6 points in these exact same polls that we look at here, where Harris was only trailing by 2 points. So the movement is actually from Biden to Harris, not actually Harris herself necessarily moving.
There you go. One last thing here, and I just want you to see this back to the black voters and how here's the thing. One of these polls will show that black voters are now finding Kamala Harris more popular than they did Joe Biden. Big deal. The fact is, if a Democrat doesn't win 90% of the black vote, they're done. They're just finished. It's kaput. This is a vote. They've always relied on this. They've always taken it for granted. And that should be the baseline. That should be the foundation that you've got when you're building your national coalition. So I want you to watch this moment from a Zoom call. This was made public. Anton Daniels, who is a podcaster and political commentator, he's on this Zoom call with all these other, streamers, where one of the women says that she's voting for Kamala Harris because she's a black woman. That's it. She said, sorry, she's a black woman, so I'm going to vote for her. And watch how this turns. And these are influencers. These are influencers in the African-American community.
I'm going to just be real honest with this. She's a black woman.
Yeah, because they folk, not Kim folk.
I think it goes back to what somebody was saying, where it's not voting for someone, but majority will vote for somebody else just.
Hold on. Let me line this out.
I think majority
is it only because she a black woman.
Yeah.
Do you not see how that's a bad idea?
Elaborate.
Okay, so we're in 3 proxy wars with some of the most powerful leaders in the world. She failed at the border, in which we have an estimation of 15 to 20 million people illegally into this country. That is literally overtaking and bankrupting Chicago to the tune of over $400 million per year, and they are in a deficit. Oakland is going out of business. San Francisco, ditto. California, $65 billion deficit. New York, they're literally cutting trash, in which they are the rattiest, dirtiest city, and they've taken up resources as far as free healthcare, free hotels to the tune of $600 a day. They're literally taking over your schools. Your taxpayer dollars are going to fund the migrant crisis. She was supposed to be in charge of this. We have a failing economy. Every single day I see people getting on the internet talking about $30 an hour is the new minimum wage, because inflation is out of control. At one point, it was at almost 10%, depending on what city that you were. She has no policy, no record to stand on. One of the biggest things that she did in her career was lock up more black men than ever before. But we sitting here and vote her in office on identity politics. The very person that she was under as far as the president of the United States of America, she called him racist during the debate, which shows you how fake she is. And the only thing that we can stand on from a policy perspective is whether or not she's black and she's a woman. We did that during the Obama administration, and he didn't do anything for black people. As a matter of fact, y'all complain because the only person that he did, or the only group of people that he really stood for, is the alphabet community, and that's his landmark thing that he's still standing on today. So the only thing that we have to stand on is identity politics. That shit didn't work with Tiffany Henyard in Dayton, Illinois. It didn't work with Karen Bass. It didn't work with Lori Lightfoot in Chicago. It didn't work with Brandon Johnson that then took over her position in Chicago. It didn't work with Andre Dickens in Atlanta. It didn't work with Eric Adams in New York. It doesn't work across the country. Every single Democratic city is a hellhole. And we sitting here talking about identity politics?
I mean, I don't know about you, but I just subscribed to Anton Daniels' YouTube channel. That is fantastic. It's brilliant. It's exactly how you're supposed to respond to people who say, well, yeah, I don't really care about the issues, but I think it's just time for a woman. I'm sorry. As my friend Dan Bongino would say, it's not QT time right now. Okay. There's some serious stuff going on in this country. Beyond serious. And if you're still back there, if it's 2008 for you, and you just like the fact that you can change your Facebook page and it makes you feel good about yourself, you're ruining the country. You are literally ruining the country. This is a terrible candidate. And honestly, the only thing she's got going for her right there is what you saw, is that she's a black woman. And there are some people who are still clinging on to identity politics, and it's not going to end well. Things are way too serious now here. The beauty of Barack Obama doing that in 2008 is that he came off 8 years of relative prosperity in this country and peace. Not peace internationally, of course, but in our country. I mean, we didn't have the crime on our streets. We didn't have the insanity that we've got right now. The financial crisis, which almost seemed manufactured, happened just in time for Barack Obama to promise everybody hope and change. And well, look what that got us. That was fantastic. And that, what you just saw, that's why Kamala Harris and the Democrats are very worried about solid foundational voting groups that they used to rely on. They didn't have to do anything to get them. And now they don't have them. Not the way they used to.